You know, we trust our eyes more than, well, almost any other physical sense. When you tell someone an unbelievable story, the first thing they ask for is visual proof.
Yeah. They want to see the photos on your phone.
Right, they want to pull up the video. We have built our entire framework for understanding reality on this basic assumption that if something is real, it has a physical form, and that form will eventually, you know, catch the light and register on our optic nerves.
It is the main verifying mechanism for a human being.
Yeah.
I mean, the scientific method itself relies on observation. We want tangible evidence right in front of us.
Yes, exactly.
And if we cannot observe it or measure it and verify it with our physical senses, we tend to become highly skeptical of its existence.
Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Whether you are prepping for a theological discussion or you are just insanely curious about ancient languages, this deep dive is going to break down the meaning of unseen realities without overwhelming you with academic jargon. Today, we have a very specific mission. We have a massive stack of theological lexicons, grammatical dictionaries, journal articles, and academic commentaries. And all of this material focuses entirely on one single ancient Greek word.
Just one word.
Right, one word. It is a word that describes things that entirely bypass our physical senses.
And that word is Aoratos. The basic English translation is invisible or unseen.
Okay.
Our goal is to extract the most fascinating insights about this word by tracing its usage across centuries of ancient literature.
So we're going to start with pagan magical texts, move through the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, and then finish with the earliest Christian writings.
Right. We want to see how the definition functioned and what it meant for the people trying to articulate realities that completely bypass their physical sight.
Okay, let's unpack this from the very beginning. To understand how ancient writers used a word, we have to look at the anatomy of the word itself. Let us break down the basic etymology of Aoratos. It functions as an adjective, and it puts two distinct pieces of language together. The first piece is a prefix that grammarians call the alpha privative.
Yeah, the alpha privative is a linguistic tool that negates whatever word comes immediately after it. We do this in English all the time with prefixes like un or in.
Like invisible.
Right. When you add into visible, you completely reverse the meaning. The second half of Aoratos comes from the Greek root word horao, which means to see.
To see, okay.
So when you fuse that negating prefix to the root word for seeing, you create a concept that strips away the very possibility of optical verification.
You are taking the physical function of the eye and, well, turning it off.
Yes.
The standard lexical definitions, like the ones you find in the Lunita lexicon or the BDAG, define it as not subject to being seen, invisible, or impossible to see. But what I find really fascinating about looking at a root word like horao is seeing all the other Greek words that branch off from it.
Oh, absolutely.
The lexicons provide a massive list of related cognates that all deal with physical sight.
And the cognate list is quite extensive and highly physical. You have eidon, which is a primary verb for the act of seeing.
Right.
You have the word isoptron, which is the ancient Greek word for a mirror. You also have katharo, which means to perceive something with absolute clarity.
So the language gets incredibly specific regarding the physical eyes and the face.
Yes, it does.
For instance, the word autoptes, which means an eyewitness.
Yeah, autoptes, someone who was physically present and verified an event with their own optic nerves.
Wow.
We also see oma, the literal noun for the eye itself. And then the root extends into more descriptive words like skothropos, which describes someone with a sad face or a downcast look.
Wait, there is one more, right?
Yes, there is even the word hupopiazo, which carries the literal meaning of striking someone under the eye.
Striking someone under the eye.
Yes, it implies disciplining someone or giving them a black eye.
That is wild to me. The linguistic distance between giving someone a black eye and the concept of invisibility seems massive, but they share the exact same root.
They do.
It shows how physically grounded this root word is. It all comes back to the physical face, the optic nerve, and the lens of the eye. So when an ancient writer used Aoratos, they were making a very deliberate statement.
Very deliberate statement.
They were taking an object or a concept and forcibly removing it from that highly physical realm of observation.
Which forces the reader to engage with reality in a completely different way. You are asking the reader to accept the existence of something they cannot verify with their oma, their eye.
I think the best way to grasp how strange this concept must have felt is to look at our modern world. We deal with Aoratos concepts all the time without realizing it.
That's a good point.
I always go back to the idea of Wi-Fi signals, or, dark matter, and astrophysics. If I pull out my phone, I am relying on a constant stream of digital information flying through the air.
Right.
I cannot see those radio waves.
Right.
But I know they are real. I accept their reality based entirely on their effects.
That is a very helpful analogy. We accept the unseen because of the tangible results it produces. When we look at ancient secular Greek literature, the philosophers and writers were wrestling with similar conceptual leaps.
Like who?
What the lexical sources point us to classical writers who used Aoratos to describe concepts completely outside the physical realm. Plato used it. Diodorus Siculus used it. Cornutus and Maximus of Tyre used it.
So they were using it to talk about the realm of ideas, or the nature of the gods, or the structure of the cosmos, things you could not put in a box and measure.
Yes, the philosophical ideal of things beyond the physical shadows. Interestingly, the ancient writer Lucian employed the word in a very different way.
How so?
Instead of using it in a passive sense, meaning an object that is impossible to see, he used it in an active sense. He used aoratos to describe someone who is without sight, a person who is blind.
Oh, wow. That is a fascinating shift in grammar.
It is.
The flexibility of the word is evident in the source data. The lexicons actually list out all the different grammatical forms the word takes across various ancient texts.
There are a lot of them.
Yeah, we see a aorato, aoratoi, aoraton, aoratos, aoratus, aoratu, and aoraton.
That extensive list of conjugations demonstrates how adaptable the word was for ancient authors. They applied this concept of invisibility to singular objects, to plural groups, to masculine subjects, to feminine nouns, and to neuter ideas.
It was basically a utility word for anything that evaded the eyes.
Precisely. But the usage that I find most striking in the secular sources comes from the PGM.
The Papyri Graecae Magicae. The Greek magical papyri. These are ancient documents filled with spells, incantations, and magical formulas.
Yes. In these pagan magical texts, Aoratos described the unseen spiritual forces that the magician is attempting to manipulate.
Okay.
The pagan view of the invisible world was highly chaotic. It was a realm filled with unseen deities, demons, and energies that were constantly interfering with human life.
Right.
The magician's job was to use specific formulas to bind or control these invisible elements. The unseen world was something to be feared, appeased, or manipulated for personal gain.
You are basically trying to hack the unseen world. You are using a spell to force an invisible entity to do your bidding.
That was the idea, yeah.
That pagan worldview is so chaotic, it feels like you are constantly playing defense against unseen threats, which raises a massive question.
Yeah, what's that?
If this word carried that kind of philosophical and magical baggage in the ancient Greek world, how did it end up becoming a core piece of Jewish and Christian vocabulary?
The bridge between the secular Greek world and the biblical text is the Septuagint. The Septuagint, which scholars often abbreviate as the LXX, is the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible.
Right, the Greek translation.
Long before the New Testament was written, Jewish scholars in Alexandria took the Hebrew scriptures and translated them into the common language of the Mediterranean world, which was Greek.
So these translators are looking at the Hebrew scrolls, and they hit massive, weighty theological concepts. And they have to scan through the Greek vocabulary available to them and pick the word that best captures the Hebrew thought. And the sources show us that they picked aoratos to translate to very specific Hebrew words.
The first Hebrew word they translated as aoratos is tohu. The second is mistar. The translation of tohu is particularly striking because of where it appears.
Okay, let's look at that.
The lexical data defines tohu as a wilderness, a wasteland, an emptiness, a desert, or a state of nothingness.
And it shows up in literally the second verse of the entire Bible. Genesis 1:2. The earth was without form and void. That word void or formless is the Hebrew word tohu.
Exactly. The translators looked at the Hebrew word for a formless, empty wasteland, and they decided the best Greek equivalent was aoratos, invisible.
Wow.
We have several academic commentaries in our stack that analyze the condition of the earth in this specific verse.
Yeah.
We have Herbert E. Ryle's work on Genesis for the Cambridge Bible for schools and colleges.
Okay.
We have Tremper Longman III in the Expositor's Bible Commentary. We have Frank E. Gabelin's analysis of Genesis 1.2 through 1.5.
Okay, let me push back on this a second. I'm trying to picture a wasteland. If I think of a physical desert or a desolate landscape, it is very clearly visible. I can stand in a desert. I can see the sand. I can verify it with my optic nerves.
Right.
So why would these highly educated Jewish scholars look at a word meaning wasteland and translate it into a Greek word meaning impossible to see? Feels like a massive mismatch of concepts.
What is fascinating here is the chronological sequence of the creation account. You have to look at the exact conditions of the cosmos in Genesis 1.2.
Okay, lay it out for me.
The text says the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. Notice what has not been created yet. Light does not enter the picture until verse 3, when God speaks and commands light to exist.
Right. Let there be light is the next step in the sequence.
Therefore, the pre-creation condition of the earth, this unformed, empty wasteland, is fundamentally unseen because the physical medium required for sight does not exist yet.
That makes sense.
There are no photons, there is no light to bounce off an object and hit an optic nerve. It is an absolute, staggering darkness.
So the wasteland isn't invisible because it lacks substance. It is invisible because the physical conditions required for visibility have not been spoken into existence by the Creator yet.
Precisely. This specific translation choice highlights a massive theological premise regarding the absolute sovereignty of God.
How so?
Well, the earth in verse 2 lacks order and structure. God is about to bring shape to the cosmos by taking an unformed, unseen void, something entirely Aoratos, and commanding it into a highly ordered, visible reality. The text exalts the authority of the Creator.
Wow.
God speaks, and the unseen void becomes a visible universe.
That is an incredible detail. It completely shifts how you read the opening lines of Genesis. It is not just about organizing dirt. It is about establishing the very possibility of perception.
Exactly.
Now, you mentioned the second Hebrew word translated as Aoratos is mistar.
Yes, mistar means a secret place or a hiding place, a location that is concealed from the public eye.
We see this translation in Isaiah chapter 45, verse 3. God is speaking through the prophet, and he promises to give inevitable treasures.
The phrase invisible treasures creates a brilliant contrast. When a human king accumulates treasure gold, silver, jewels, the entire point is to display it.
Right, you want to show it off.
You put it in a visible treasury to show off your wealth and status. Treasures are meant to catch the light. But the text speaks of divine treasures that are fundamentally hidden, existing in an unseen state away from the natural eyes of men.
The concept of unseen things impacting the physical world also shows up in the extra-biblical literature from the intertestamental period.
It does.
Our sources reference the book of 2 Maccabees, chapter 9, verse 5. This passage describes an unseen stroke of judgment.
It refers to a sudden consequence or a divine intervention that arrives with zero physical warning. You do not see the army marching over the hill. You do not see a physical weapon.
Right.
The judgment comes directly from the unseen realm into the physical realm.
So by the time we arrive at the 1st century, the word Aoratos has evolved from describing philosophical concepts and magical spells into a robust theological term.
It really has.
The Jewish mind understood the unseen realm not as a chaotic mess of magical energies, but as the domain of the sovereign creator. When we move into the New Testament, we see the Apostle Paul utilizing this word to articulate the sheer magnitude of God's nature.
Yes, and Paul uses the word in two very distinct ways. The grammatical dictionaries are very careful to separate these two usages.
Okay.
We see the word in Romans chapter 1, verse 20, and we see it again in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 17.
Let us start with Romans 1.20. Paul writes about God's invisible attributes. The lexicons point out that Paul is using the plural noun form here. The Greek phrase is ta aorata.
The distinction between a noun usage and an adjective usage carries a lot of weight in these texts. In Romans 1, Paul is describing specific aspects, qualities, or attributes belonging to God.
Okay.
He specifically names his eternal strength and divine nature. Paul is stating that these qualities are entirely impossible to see with the physical eye.
Our sources reference some highly specific academic work on this passage. There are early 20th century dissertations that dedicated massive amounts of space to this one concept. Oh, definitely. The notes mention H. Daxer's 1914 dissertation from Rostock, which analyzed Romans 1.08 through 2.20, paying special attention to how Paul's teaching interacted with the Jewish thought of his day.
Daxer and other scholars recognize that Paul is setting up a relationship between the unseen creator and the visible creation.
Right.
Paul's argument in Romans 1 is that even though the attributes of God are te aorata, they can be clearly perceived through the physical things he has made.
So the creation acts as proof.
Exactly. The visible universe functions as a massive, tangible billboard, pointing to the unseen strength of the one who made it.
Then you turn over to 1 Timothy 1.17, and Paul shifts his grammar. He's not talking about attributes anymore. He describes God himself as the King of ages, immortal and invisible. This is the adjective usage.
Yes, in 1 Timothy, Paul is no longer describing what God possesses. He is defining the fundamental essence of who God is. We have another scholarly reference here, E. Fasher, who wrote a study in 1931 explicitly titled Deus Invisibilis, the Invisible God. When you synthesize Paul's logic across these two letters, you run into a very stark creator-creature distinction.
Meaning God is fundamentally separate from the physical universe.
Completely separate. He is absolutely transcendent. A lot of ancient pagan religions viewed their gods as essentially superpowered humans who lived on top of a mountain.
Like Zeus or something.
Right. They were part of the physical system.
They.
But Paul is asserting that the creator exists entirely outside the physical architecture of the universe. He is inherently Aoratos. He cannot be observed by the optic nerves he designed.
If we just stop and think about the implications of that for a second, it creates a massive logical tension. Humanity has a severe problem.
What sort of problem?
Well, we are physical creatures. We require sensory input. We learn by seeing, touching, and hearing. If the creator of the universe is strictly, fundamentally, and eternally Aoratos, how in the world do we bridge that gap?
It is a huge issue.
How can a physical creature ever know an unseeable God?
That is the central theological problem of human existence. And the Apostle Paul addresses that exact tension in his letter to the Colossians.
So we have looked at the void in Genesis, and we have looked at Paul's letters to Rome and Timothy. But when you get to Colossians chapter 1, the math seemingly stops making sense.
It does get complicated.
Colossians 1.55 says that Christ is the image of the invisible God. And the very next verse, Colossians 1.116, says that by him all things were created, both visible and invisible.
This section of Colossians is often referred to by scholars as a poetic confession or a Christological hymn. The source notes list an immense amount of commentary on these specific verses.
We have quite the list.
We do. We have Marcus Barth writing in the Anchor Yale Bible. We have Jerry L. Sumney in the New Testament Library Series. We have G.K. Beale in the Baker Exegetical Commentary.
Right.
We have Constantine R. Campbell in the Baylor Handbook on the Greek New Testament. And we have Martha King's Exegetical Summary.
The reason all these scholars dedicate hundreds of pages to these two verses is because the Greek syntax sets up a staggering paradox. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let us apply some basic logic to the phrase, the image of the invisible God. The word for image is icon. An icon. A visual representation. It is, by definition, something you look at.
Yes, a statue, a portrait, a reflection.
How can you have a visual representation of something that is impossible to see? If God has no physical form to capture, how can Christ be his visual image? You are placing the word icon directly next to the word Aoratos. It feels like a contradiction.
To resolve this tension, we have to look closely at how the provided journal articles analyze the text. Christopher S. Northcott wrote a piece in the Tyndale Bulletin in 2018 arguing that we misunderstand the ancient concept of an image if we just think of it as a photograph.
Okay.
Northcott argues that Colossians 1.15a functions as a designation of authority.
What does that mean in an ancient context?
Think about how a Roman emperor ruled his vast territory. The emperor physically lived in Rome. The citizens living in a distant province like Syria or Britannia would never see his physical face.
So he was basically unseen by them.
He was functionally invisible to them, yes. But the emperor would send a statue, an icon of himself, to be placed in the center of the distant city.
Okay, I see where this is going.
That statue did not just show them what his nose looked like. It represented his absolute ruling authority over that physical space. Where the image was, the authority of the emperor was present.
That clears up so much. To be the image of the invisible God is not just about Christ providing a physical face for our optic nerves to process.
No, it is much bigger than that.
It means Christ carries the full sovereign authority and exact representation of the unapproachable creator directly into the created realm.
This is supported by Luis Carlos Reyes, who published an analysis on the structure and rhetoric of Colossians 1.15 through 1.20 in the journal Philologia Neotestamentaria. Reyes looks at how the argument builds. Because Christ holds this absolute authority as the image, verse 16 expands his jurisdiction over the entire cosmos. Verse 16 states that Christ created all things, both visible and invisible.
The Greek text actually contrasts the two categories. It uses aorata for the invisible things and horata for the visible things.
Yes, it sets them side by side.
But what are the invisible things that Paul is talking about here? Is he talking about Wi-Fi signals and atoms?
Based on the immediate context of the verse, Paul clarifies what he means by the unseen things. He lists thrones, dominions, rulers, and authorities. He is talking about the massive spiritual structures that govern the cosmos. the unseen authorities.
If we connect this back to what we saw in the Greek magical papyri, the pagan world was terrified of these unseen spiritual forces.
Oh, absolutely
They
terrifying.
felt completely at the mercy of chaotic, invisible dominions.
But Paul is asserting a completely different hierarchy of reality. He's stating that the visible physical world and the terrifying unseen spiritual structures are all created by and entirely subordinate to Christ.
Wow.
Christ holds supreme headship over all creation. He rules the visible realm you can see, and he rules the unseen realm you cannot see.
That requires a total overhaul of how a person views reality. The human mind assumes the visible world is the primary reality. The things we can touch feel the most solid.
Yes, that is the default setting.
But Colossians argues that the unseen realities, the authority of Christ, the strength of the Creator, the spiritual thrones, are actually the base structures holding the visible world together. The seen is subordinate to the unseen.
This specific worldview took deep root in the early Christian church. The final section of our source material looks at how the Apostolic Fathers utilized the word Aoratos in their extra-biblical writings.
Who are the Apostolic Fathers again?
The Apostolic Fathers were the church leaders who wrote just after the New Testament period. The sources provide references from Ignatius of Antioch, to Clement, the Epistle of Barnabas, the Shepherd of Hermas, and the Epistle to Ignatius.
Ignatius of Antioch is a fascinating figure. He was a prominent bishop in the early 2nd century, and the way he uses this word is incredibly striking.
Very striking.
We have 2 quotes from his letters that stand out. In his letter to the Magnesians, chapter 3, verse 2, Ignatius refers to Christ as the invisible bishop.
The Greek phrase places the concept of oversight, the bishop or overseer, right next to the concept of being unseen. A physical bishop is someone you can look at, someone who stands in front of a congregation and exercises authority.
So to call Christ the invisible bishop means he is actively ruling, guiding, and overseeing the church, even though he is not physically standing in the room.
Exactly.
His authority is active, even if his physical form is Aoratos.
It is a direct application of the sovereign headship Paul described in Colossians. Ignatius takes it a step further in his letter to Polycarp. In Polycarp chapter 3, verse 2, Ignatius writes a phrase that perfectly encapsulates the doctrine of the Incarnation.
What does he say?
He refers to Christ as the invisible one who became visible for our sakes.
The sources provide the exact Greek phrase for this. It is ho Aoratos, ho dihamas Aoratos.
That phrasing is mathematically precise theology. The one who is by his very eternal nature, completely outside the boundaries of human sight, willingly restricts himself and steps across the boundary into the visible realm.
Wow.
The unapproachable creator assumes a physical form, possessing a physical oma, a physical eye, for the sake of humanity.
And Ignatius continues this theme of unseen authority in his letter to the Smyrnians, chapter 6, verse 1, where he mentions rulers, visible and invisible. He is tracking perfectly with Paul's language about spiritual authorities.
He really is. The other Apostolic Fathers utilized the word to articulate the unseen nature of spiritual realities as well. The Epistle of Barnabas, chapter 11, verse 4, references invisible treasures.
Which is a direct echo of the Septuagint translation of Isaiah 45:3 that we looked at earlier.
Yes, it is.
The early church is pulling these older Greek translations forward into their teaching.
We also see an intriguing usage in the Epistle to Ignatius. In chapter 6, verse 4, the author discusses the nature of the human soul.
Okay.
He describes the invisible soul being housed within a visible physical body. The sources point out that this concept was also utilized by the Jewish philosopher Philo, who applied Aoratos to the unseen intellectual world and the unseen human soul.
If we connect all these distinct usages into a single comprehensive picture, we see the early Christian church adopting a singular word to explain their entire orientation to reality.
It becomes a lens for everything.
They are operating under a framework where the most substantial, authoritative, and permanent things in existence are the very things you cannot physically see.
God himself, the authority of Christ, the spiritual thrones governing the cosmos, the human soul, the treasures of divine judgment and reward. All of them are Aoratos.
It is a complete inversion of how we are conditioned to think. We assume the physical dirt, the buildings, the money, the things we can verify with our optic nerves. We assume those things are the solid reality.
Right.
And the unseen spiritual things are just floating concepts. But these ancient texts argue the exact opposite. The physical universe is a temporary created manifestation. The solid, unshakable foundation of reality is entirely unseen.
The lexical progression of this word is remarkable when you view it from a distance. We started with the basic linguistic formula, an alpha privative attached to a verb for seeing. Just a simple way to say, not visible.
And then we watched that basic word get applied to pagan magical forces. We watched it translate the dark, unformed void of the Genesis creation account. We saw Paul use it to draw a massive distinction between the transcendent creator and the physical universe.
Yes, we traced it through all of that.
We saw it placed next to the word image to describe the supreme authority of Christ over all creation. And finally, we saw early bishops using it to explain the incarnation and the human soul.
It demonstrates how tracing a single lexical concept can completely alter your reading of an ancient text. When a modern reader sees the word invisible in an English translation, they usually read it as a simple descriptive adjective.
Right, like an invisible force field in a sci-fi movie. It lacks weight.
But when you understand the massive theological baggage attached to the Greek word, the contrast with physical eyewitnesses, the connection to divine sovereignty over the formless void, the paradox of the unseen becoming visible, it forces you to read the text differently.
It really does.
It demands that you confront your own assumptions about what is truly real.
So what does this all mean for you? It means that when you read these texts, you are being invited to acknowledge a reality that is bigger than your physical senses.
Yes.
You are being asked to recognize that the most significant authority in your life is not the authority you can verify with your optic nerve.
Which brings us to a final, highly practical consideration. Our source text provides one final biblical reference. It is found in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 27.
Hebrews 11 is the famous chapter detailing the faith of historical figures. Verse 27 describes the life of Moses.
The text describes how Moses persevered through immense physical hardship and opposition. And the reason given for his perseverance is this phrase, as seeing him who is invisible.
Seeing him was invisible.
The Greek text is aoraton hos horon, literally, seeing the unseeable. Moses oriented his physical, daily decisions around a reality that his eyes could not verify.
He lived as if the unseen reality was more solid than the physical empire of Egypt standing right in front of him.
This raises an important question for anyone attempting to comprehend these ancient texts today. How does a person function in their daily life when they genuinely believe the most authoritative elements of reality are fundamentally unseen?
That is a fascinating question.
What happens to your physical priorities, your fears, and your decisions when you begin to treat the visible world as a shadow of a sovereign, unseen reality? That is the tension the word Aoratos leaves us to consider.